in the mix. Drill it, baby, drill it. Guyana oil deal sweet. Pump it, baby, pump it. Guyana oil give away cheap. Take it away and store it till world market price go up. Then you throw back and you laugh because you don't take Guyana off. We must hold our leaders accountable. Let them know they are responsible for the wars I'll deal in the world. When I think about it, my blood does boil. We must stop this stupidity or we'll end up in poverty. I call on all Guyanese to show solidarity. Guyana, time to unite and do what is right. Demand better oil deals. This is a national appeal. Drill it, baby, drill it. Guyana oil deal sweet. Pump it, baby, pump it. Guyana oil give away cheap. Take it away and store it till world market price go up. Then you throw back and you laugh because you don't pay Guyana off. Guyana, this is a hijack. Highway robbery. Two-wheel blocks. Oil black, a heavy load. Oil black, a heavy load. Oil black broker, we back, oh Guyana. Oil black broker, we back, oh. Oil black broker, we back, oh Guyana. Oil black broker, we back, oh. Kaieteur and Kanji blocks, they give away free. Oil black broker, we back, oh. Worth billions of US robbing the treasury. Oil black broker, we back, oh. Them kinda junky business they doing to we. Our national resources gone to friends and family. You give a Mercedes to a man with a bicycle who can't even drive and don't have a license. Then they turn around and say, Guyana, you owe we. First bill 100 million in our currency. When I ask Robert, he say, no, not me. The people who get the block, them I never see. I say, Robert boy, what was on your mind? He said, don't ask me, it's the liars who sign. Uncle Donald, shame on you. I never thought you would have done that too. Trotman is where you're there. Trotman, what you gonna say? Arman is where you're there. Arman, what you gonna say? Apnu and EFC and the PPPC in saying nothing to we. Somebody tell me how could this be? As a Guyanese I regret, like we ain't got nothing to forget.
Kaieteur Radio.
Covering Guyana from coast to coast.
Demerara and Essequibo 99.1 FM.
Berbice 99.5 FM. Kaieteur Radio.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us for this week's edition of Guyana's Oil and You. I am your hostess, Kiana Wilberg, editor at Kaieteur News, and tonight we are continuing part 2 of our discussion centered on oil and the environment. Our panelists for this discussion are environmentalist Mrs. Annette Arjun Martins, chartered accountant Mr. Christopher Ram, and international lawyer Miss Melinda Janke. To our panel tonight, I'd like to say thank you for taking the time to be part of this discussion. We have 1 hour, and during that time, there are some really important developments that I would like to have your take on. Earlier today, ExxonMobil kicked off its consultations on the Yellowtail project, the fort to be developed in the Stabroek Block, and it is expected to come on stream by 2025. Ms. Annette Arjun Martins, you would have participated in that session today, and I'd like to start things off with your perspective this evening. Can you shed some light on your observations during the consultation, the first round that kicked off today, and what were some of the issues you raised, and could you tell us if you were satisfied with the general responses?
Well, good evening, everybody, and it's a pleasure to be back on with Chris and Melinda. And yes, Kiana, I did actually participate at the 1 o'clock online consultations. And to be quite frank, I had expected quite a lot more participants to be engaged, but there were only 47 in all, and about at least half a dozen were Exxon staff, and maybe another half dozen the ERM consultants. So it was a very small discussion, and we had connectivity issues in the earlier stages. I found at the beginning as well too, we spent a bit of time listening to this safety moment, dealing with rainy seasons and slipping on tiles and stuff. And then the actual video presentations were having some lag. I don't know if the other participants had the same problem, but I'm sure that I lost quite a bit of what was being shared. So that sort of put me on the back foot to really ask more questions, I guess. So when the presentations were over, very short presentations, I should add, and they were open for questions, for some reason, I wasn't being allowed to unmute. So that also took up some time. And, those sort of challenges really throw you mentally, because, I kept on trying to unmute and I couldn't. The admin wasn't enabling me to unmute. When I finally did unmute, my question was regards the cumulative impact study, because one of the presenters had mentioned that they were going to embark on very robust cumulative impact studies. And it occurred to me that this is the fourth project, and we're now embarking on robust cumulative impact studies. But when I asked the question, he wasn't clear on what I was asking. I was trying to find out when would be the timelines for that study to be done, because it's been requested since the Payara consultations, and we haven't had them as yet. So I wanted to get an idea of, could he indicate what timeline this cumulative impact study would be done in. And he wasn't clear on my question. He appeared to not be clear. And when he asked for clarity, again, I was not allowed to unmute to provide clarity. So someone in their Exxon group tried to assist, but didn't really capture what I was asking as clear as I would have liked. Nevertheless, the answer was a bit meandering, and then I took the opportunity to say that look, even during the Payara field development plans last year, for example, it was mandated that a wastewater impact study be commissioned, and it was given a timeline, I think, of about 3 months. So, but I was cut off. And said, look, this consultation was just for Yellowtail. Don't go outside of that. But the parallel I was trying to draw is that even with the third project, where a wastewater management study was impact study was mandated, almost 8 months later, we have not heard anything. So I was just trying to get an idea of when would this robust, in their own words, cumulative impact study be done. That was the first question, which wasn't answered as clearly as I would have liked. And then, of course, my other questions subsequently were with the maps of the increase in marine traffic and the potential impacts on the migratory corridors and the marine life load passed through there, as well as the noticeable increase in vessels flying flags of convenience and their obvious implications for that in terms of liability. And then I also asked about the protected areas that they arrived at no impacts on life in the protected areas, but there was no data to back that up. So all in all, I was not happy with the clarity that I was given. And then we were, of course, reminded in the normal tone that we please submit our concerns and comments in writing, which, was for me upsetting because we did that for Lisa 1, we did that for Lisa 2, we did that for Payara, and the majority was not taken on board. So I will stop there and so not belabor too much.
And it's really interesting that you mentioned the aspect of cumulative impact study and a robust study being done, because I too was a participant at that virtual consultation, and I was left to wonder, well, what really would be the point of a cumulative impact study if contracts are already being given out for the construction of the FPSO for that food project, for example. And an impact study was also promised for the entire Stabroek Block field when the former EPA head, Dr. Vincent Adams, was in place. He had passed some instructions to say, well, listen, an entire impact study needs to be done for all the projects so that you can have an understanding of what is going to be the impact of the emissions on the environment. But with that said, I'd like to now open the floor to Ms. Janki to ask her perspective on some of the issues, her issues that she may have with the Yellowtail project. And just to follow up on Annette's point as to whether the whole point of a cumulative impact study is just being said for, just for the point of it being there.
Yes. Good evening, Kiana. Always good to be on the show with Annette and Chris. And good evening to your viewers and listeners. I think if we're talking about Yellowtail, I think one of the first things that one ought to be aware of is that the chances of Yellowtail actually happening are actually very slim now, because there have been mega shifts in the fossil fuel sector over the last few days. The fossil fuel sector is in decline. Board shareholders are telling the oil companies to stop producing oil. So the oil companies are finally being forced to deal with the reality of the global energy market. Having said that, Exxon is, of course, lagging behind the rest of the oil majors and does have this sort of dinosaur business plan, which has cost them a lot of money. I mean, they are in financial trouble. So it's possible that they will think that Yellowtail is feasible. And in that case, I think people ought, at this stage, certainly to use the opportunity to ensure that we don't end up in Yellowtail with the same sort of situation in Liza 1, Liza 2, and Payara. And therefore, I have some suggestions. First of all, I don't know what this public consultation is that they held on Zoom, because that's nowhere in the legislation. It's very nice that they did it, but it's of no consequence whatsoever. The law very clearly says that you make written submissions, and that's section 11, subsection 5, paragraph 7. And the key is to make written submissions and to put your words in. There's a 28-day time limit, and I believe that expires on the 6th of June, which is a Sunday, because the EPA, for reasons best known to itself, decided to publish the notice on the 9th of May in the Chronicle, and I'm not entirely sure how many people read the Chronicle, so it being more of a government paper. So people have until the 6th of June in which to say to the EPA what they want the EIA to cover. This is not the environmental impact assessment. This is actually saying to the EPA, this is what we want, the questions that we want you to ask. Now, not many people in this country have the technical ability to do that.
Yes.
So I have an offer to make. we have a scientist who is looking at the project summary. Once we have that information, we will make it publicly available. We will write to the EPA, and we will invite members of the public, if they wish, to also add their names to that letter to the EPA. So members of the public have an opportunity to use that scientific information as and when we have it, and we will make it available as soon as we have it on the internet. You probably will need to look at the website, A Fair Deal for Guyana, A Fair Deal for the Planet, and we will try to reach people in other ways as well. But that's the way to go. It's to say to the EPA, we, the citizens of Guyana, require you to look at to answer these questions, and to make ESSO answer these questions and apply the Environmental Protection Act.
Thank you very much there, Ms. Janke. Mr. Ram, are you there with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, excellent. Nice to have you there. Now, I'd like to turn a very important question to you. I know we're talking right now about the environmental impact assessment, but one of the observations that I made during my participation in today's virtual consultation on the Yellowtail project is that there weren't a lot of questions being asked about the project summary. Now, do you believe that the populace is truly educated or informed enough to probably hold the regulator accountable in terms of what they need to see in the EIA, what has been part of previous EIAs and what has not been observed, or what's being done in contravention of previous EIAs? Do you get the impression that the public is truly aware of the disadvantages or the advantages that some of these projects may have when it comes to the environment, and how to question ExxonMobil or demand from ExxonMobil certain things? Do you get the impression that we have an informed public? And if not, what are the dangers of that?
Thank you very much. Good to be back. The environment, of course, is not my forte, but your question is general, and I thank you. Quite frankly, I do not even believe the EPA, as presently staffed and constituted, is capable of doing the kind of work that is required. Now, you ask about holding the EPA accountable. In fact, I would have thought that the EPA would be the one to raise all these robust and serious questions of the proposal. They are acting on our behalf. They're the surrogates, and one would have thought that they themselves might have commissioned an independent review. I'm not sure you mentioned ERM. I think that's, were they operating for the company? So we do need to have a very robust exercise, and we need to have a proper and informed review of this new project. So I don't believe that, as I said, the public doesn't know. And unfortunately, one of the big challenges we face is that all of this is taking place, not the consultation, but the oil is 125 miles or something like that out there. So this sense of the physical impact until there's some major issue. So I think this work has got to be done, and I'm disappointed in the EPA that they don't seem to think that it's part of their job. But I want to go back to what Ms. Janke Melinda raised. ExxonMobil has moved from a profit of $14 billion in 2019 to a loss of $19.6 billion in 2020. Their earnings per share have dropped from $3.36 US cents to a loss of $5.25. I am not sure where Exxon is going to get the money to carry out these adventures that that they're hoping to do, apparently with a view to stymie everything before we see a serious halting of or serious reduction of fossil fuel. So I agree with Ms. Janki. I think if you look at what happened in the US yesterday at the AGM, the position, the direction of ExxonMobil is certainly going to change. I think that there will be a pause on their at the central level of the company, that is in Houston, that they will have to rethink their entire strategy. And if Guyana was one of their growth area and for fossil fuel, then that's likely to be a problem. I also believe what happened in the Netherlands yesterday, where, including Greenpeace, 17,000 persons took Shell to court. And the court ruled that, look, you cannot go doing this type of thing to the economy, and we want to see a very definitive plan as to how you're going to reduce emission. Chevron has the same problem. And I should point out that in the case of Shell, the whole issue was the question of this the Paris Accord. And we must remember that we too signed on to the Paris Accord, and what we are permitting might very well be in violation of our own commitment. Now, there is another development, and that development has taken place in Guyana, where there is an action brought by persons here challenging this question of pollution and violation of Article 149J of our Constitution. I think this it's probably very bad timing for the government, but it's good timing for the people, that this just cannot go on. And finally, I'm going to make this point. We also heard over the past couple of days, well, we will get $1 million for flaring. I don't read the Environmental Protection Act on the pollution, he who pollutes must pay. That is not, we are turning that on its head. We are saying, okay, you can go and pollute once you pay. That's not it. It's that if you pollute, we will certainly impose penalties. And the penalty, in my view, and I hope, Kiana, you could announce tonight what the EPA has said their number is in relation to what that charge should be. You undertook to do so last week, and I hope you made your effort and you tell our listeners what you did. Because that charge, when you take 36 days of pollution, massive amounts, it is less than 0.5% of the total revenue we can get from the oil. But let's put it another way. Are you telling me for 36 days we're going to pollute the environment by this permitted flaring, and $1 million is going to be the compensation to the country? I think something is seriously wrong in that kind of mathematics and logic. But I'll stop there.
Thank you very much for your comments, Mr. Ram. Ms. Janki, and to Ms. Annette, I'd like to put a fundamental question as well that was raised from many of the things that was put forward just now by Mr. Ram. Do you get the sense that we have an EPA that is actually a defender of the environment, or sort of accommodator of the actions of oil companies in the sake of development? And the reason why I'm asking is because, as Mr. Ram raised just now, the polluter pays principle is now being used outside of its true meaning, of its true sense, or it's not being used how it is meant, which is to actually mitigate pollution. Now it's a sort of a license to pollute the environment, as in the case with the $30 US flaring penalty that has been given to ExxonMobil for any excess flaring in the Liza Phase 1 project. So I'd be grateful if you can put forward your perspective on where do you see the EPA, or what do you believe it's morphing into, and are you concerned about that?
I would like to go first,
Yes.
Kiana. Look, to put the whole consultation today in context, right? The virtual consultation, first of all, was an opportunity for us, the public, to provide questions on matters that we need to be considered by the EPA in the Yellowtail project environmental impact assessment scope. Okay? So, I mean, for me, I'm grateful that the EPA actually has done that in all 4 projects, even though, as Melinda said earlier, it really is that we, the public, should submit written input. However, it's clear that a lot of times the public is not as aware as it should be in terms of these call for feedback and deadlines especially. So I appreciate the effort the DPA has made over the past 3 and present 4th project to give us that opportunity at least have and engage in some sort of consultation. To your direct, even though, as I said earlier in my opening remarks, the connectivity issues and the clarity of communication issues was very frustrating for me. In terms of your question on the EPA, I think that the Environmental Protection Agency is doing the best that it can do with the resources it's been given, and especially with the human resources it can afford. The reality is a lot of the technical expertise that we need, right? You cannot attract them at the present rates that we're giving our, national technical staff in the agency. So I have always felt very sympathetic to the EPA, being given always less resource than it asks for, and as a result, not having as much technical capacity as it needs, and especially we, the Guyanese public, need for it to have in today's, situation of a oil economy, and we are really caught in the back foot. So to say that EPA is protecting the oil companies' interests more than the Guyanese public, I think that's harsh. I think that once, and I noticed recently there was an advertisement for a new executive director, and I noticed that the terms of reference as well was pretty, strong. So I'm hoping that sooner or later we'll have that person, and sooner or later we'll actually have the government making available the resources to enable the EPA to track the type of expertise we need in order for it to function the way it ought to. So I'll just stop there, and then Melinda could continue.
Thank you for your comments, Annette. Ms. Janke? Oh, okay, Ms. Janke, I don't know if you can hear us, but
On mute. Sorry.
Okay, yes,
You're
you
on
are on mute.
Has to be the most common sentence on the internet these days. I think that it's important to draw a distinction between the institution of the EPA, which, as Annette says, is very poorly resourced.
Yes.
And the staff at the EPA, people at the EPA who are committed to the environment and want to do a good job and are stymied in that because the politicians will not give the EPA the resources that it needs in order to do its job. And this is really the responsibility of successive administrations who see environmental protection as an obstacle to their concept of development, which is nothing more than smashing down things in order to get cash. It's a very old-fashioned vision, if you can call it a vision, of development that does not benefit people in the country. And it is absurd and irresponsible that there is money for big infrastructure projects, but there is no money to protect the natural wealth of Guyana, which is what actually this country depends upon. And it is probably a breach of Article 36, which says that the well-being of the nation depends on clean air, clean water, and rich biodiversity, and so on. So the government's overarching obligation is really to ensure that there is a healthy environment. You can't do that unless you have an EPA that has the resources, the people, the equipment, everything that they need in order to do that job. So in answer to the question, I would say that the fault, and this is a fault because we're talking about government, and it's fine, I think one has to be very straight when we're talking about the government and not pretend. It is the fault of the government that the EPA does not have the resources that they need, and people in this country must demand that that changes. We are seeing money squandered every day on things that politicians like, while the basics are left and organized in agencies like the EPA are left to do what is probably one of the most important jobs in this country with inadequate resources. So we need to get the resources into the EPA. At the same time, people must also insist that the EPA does its statutory job and must hold the EPA to account when it doesn't do its statutory job.
Thank you.
You can't simply leave it to the politicians and to the EPA. Every individual in this country has a responsibility to act.
Thank you very much for your perspective there, Ms. Janke. I'd like to go back to three important issues that were raised by Mr. Ram before we continued on the our impressions or perspectives on the regulator for the sector. Now, on Wednesday, we had ExxonMobil receiving an unprecedented blow from a relatively small hedge fund called Engine One, and it lost two of its 12 board seats to Engine One. Engine One had put up 4 nominees for individuals who represent climate change issues and believe that the mandate of the company ought to align with the Paris Agreement to reduce global temperatures. So on one hand, we had ExxonMobil suffering a huge blow. Then there's Chevron and its shareholders who basically backed a proposal to have the company's emissions reduced. And you had the court over in the Netherlands. Yes, saying that by 2030, Royal Dutch Shell ought to reduce its emissions by 45% compared to 2019 levels. Now we have these 3 major shifts in the industry. And then there's Guyana moving full steam ahead with consultations for Yellowtail and discussions between the government and ExxonMobil on bringing more projects on board. What does this really tell you about the government that we have, the company ExxonMobil that's in our backyard? What impression do you get when you see these changes, these major shifts happening in the industry, but the government and the oil company that's in our backyard seem to be ignoring these major developments in the sector? If our government continues to be oblivious to these changes, what do you see happening with the future of our people? Mr. Ram, I'd like to start with you.
Thank you. Well, just like what happened in the United States, Exxon and Chevron, what happened in France with the Grand Syn case, what happened with Royal Dutch Shell yesterday in the Netherlands. The court might have to step in, or if the court doesn't step in, and I think we're going to see more and more cases being brought before the courts, then the market will step in. Look, Exxon is cash strapped. Exxon at December 31, 2020 only had $4 billion in cash and cash equivalents. Now we know that Exxon is not the only player.
Yes.
In Stabroek, you have Hess, you have Sinopec. But the market is going to take its toll, and we are insensitive, if not tone deaf. We don't have the resources. That's why we can't have a local content policy up to now. And let me remind you the question I asked you, and I'd also asked you to find out about the local content policy. What's going to happen with this place if you have 10, 15, 20 wells going? It's not going to, surely, what we would have to have, Exxon would have to sell almost everything it owns anywhere else for this, and clearly that's not going to happen. Exxon invests substantially in the United States of America. It's hardly likely to divest from the US. So we are likely to see the market itself. No one is going to lend money here to the oil companies. All the multilateral financial institutions and the commercial banks and the major lenders, they themselves are not going to be putting money into fossil fuel. No, it's rough for Guyana. That this is the time these things are happening, just when we could have really capitalized on our fossil wealth. But the fact is, that is the position. Exxon is not generating the revenue. What is the loss? They moved from a profit of 14 billion to a loss of 20 billion. Now, that in fact, whilst part of it is non-cash, a lot of that is cash as well. Where are they going to get money? Where are the other oil companies going to get money? And so that if we continue to be insensitive to our domestic situation, to our constitution, then I believe other factors will come into play that will provide the answers to us. Now, no one, when we spoke last week, none of us was thinking of Royal Dutch Shell or ExxonMobil. In fact, those, I almost said bastards, I'm sorry. Those people at ExxonMobil actually tried to play with the vote. They delayed the voting at the AGM. Darren Woods, the president and CEO, whose days at ExxonMobil are probably numbered. So what I think is going to happen is that even if the government of Guyana to build city and all of these things, you know, we got potholes in Georgetown, we flooding out, but we all these transformational projects, we're spending the money even before we receive it, and we're spending real and certain sums of money when against uncertain sums of money into the future. We're talking, I heard the president talk about the natural resource fund and is thinking of the Kazakhstan model. I don't know who came up with that. That if you are looking for a model for a sovereign wealth fund, which is stabilization and savings. Kazakhstan is not the place to look, not by any means. So to answer your question, our governments, the previous government was no different, can be insensitive, can be gung-ho. I like to use the term drill, baby, drill, without any reference capacity and absorptive capacity, which is why inflation is going to create serious problems in this country. Then what will happen? International events. We are now playing on an international stage. Per capita, we are the highest, we're the richest fossil fuel country in the world, per capita, because of our small population. So if we don't take care, if we are careless about the natural resource fund, if we're careless about the environment, if we're careless about local content policy, if we're careless about not having a fully functioning EP, and we're not talking about people. I don't know why we waste time trying to defend people. Nobody's talking about the people. It's obvious rubbish. We're talking about the EPA as an institution and entity with a duty to protect this country from the harm being imposed recklessly by these oil companies. So I think, sadly, I'm no big market man, but I do believe the market and international developments. We have I think it's in Edinburgh this year, we'll have the other climate conference. You're likely to see further developments there. So who knows what 1 week from now will bring? Let's see.
Thank you for your commentary there, Mr. Ram. I'd like to open the floor now to Ms. Annette, but I'd like to frame the question differently for Ms. Martins, Arjun Martins. We would have heard so many calls over the years about the fact that so much needs to be changed with Guyana's oil contract. There's so much change that is needed in the sector. And a lot of people would have said, well, it's just one of us, or it's just two, or it's just a small group of people who are sort of pushing the fight. Given what you've seen with the developments happening across the world, just recently, the case with Chevron, Shell, and even ExxonMobil, do you believe that these cases stand as testimony that Guyanese can actually, whether it's a small group or not, actually effect change when it comes to standing up against ExxonMobil?
So in last Thursday's panel, Melinda had commented about the fact that, more persons have to get involved. But the reality is, as well, as we have spoken about, is that most persons don't have the type of resources to get involved in the manner which those citizens in the other countries have managed to do. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of resources. I don't know about Chris and Melinda, but certainly I have a full-time job, and this is done as much spare time as I can to read myself into what I need to know. So that's our reality. Now, I was reading through an article in the New Yorker today on big oil's bad day, for example. And indeed, some of the tactics that were used to try and stymie the inevitable sounded like if some national efforts here sometimes are working from that playbook, and Chris would know what I'm talking about. So this is, as it said, a day of reckoning. However, I want to say that, look, you got to also look at the fact that Exxon is not tone deaf. Neither is our government tone deaf to the present day reality. So you had Exxon, even after the Engine 1-2 directives were successful, you also had Exxon committing to bring on 2 new additional directives going ahead, right? So what does that say? That they're finally beginning to budge because they see the inevitability of what is on the horizon for them. Similarly, I also want to look at the positives from what we discussed last week in terms of the mangroves removal. In the 7 days gone, you've heard both the Vice President in his press conference speak on the reforestation efforts that will be taken on not only along the coastline but also even in, I think you referenced Papuani, and then of course you had the President at the opening of the Diaspora Conference as well as on our 55th Independence Anniversary feature address, also referenced the environment and the government's intention to regain its global environmental leadership. Now, clearly, those cannot be just rhetoric without them having a plan to do so. So I'm thinking that, both Exxon and the government are not tone deaf to the reality of what happened over the past 2 days. And I think that they will be coming up with some level of adaptation to actually deal with this new reality. So I also would like to look at the positives as well that comes out of these recent developments, and I am hopeful that going forward that we could hold both Exxon and the government to what they've committed to. Apart from the terrible consultation today, we do have the written submissions going in. So my proof in the pudding would be how much of my written submissions actually show up in that scoping document. Here again, do we have an opportunity to hold the EP accountable? So let's give them a chance to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution, Ms. Annette. Ms. Janke, you have the honor of closing off our program with your comments tonight. And I'd like to frame the developments that we started out with regard to Chevron, Shell, and ExxonMobil, touching on a constitutional matter that is being brought, that was filed again in our local courts by 2 Guyanese on the ExxonMobil projects, Liza Phase 1, Liza Phase 2, and Payara. And Ms. Janke, you are one of the lawyers in that case, and I would appreciate it if you can speak to the importance of that case to Guyana and whether you feel the chances of success have increased with the latest global victories. And in addition to that, do you also believe, as I would have asked Ms. Annette, if this the global victories, as I mentioned, represent symbols to our people that whether you're a small group or not, you can make a change in standing up to those oil giants in the industry?
Thanks, Kiana. The case is a constitutional challenge in which 2 citizens have said that they would like the court to say what the law is, and I think that both Kaieteur News and then today Stabroek have explained the case very well. We will be putting the court papers up on the website so that they will be there for the public to see. And obviously, I can't be commenting on the case. I will say that it is located in a growing international movement of challenging fossil fuels, because fossil fuels are destroying the earth, and people don't want the earth to be destroyed, this being the only home that our species has ever had. And one of the difficulties is that Guyanese have been told a lot of things that are not true. So we had the Global Witness report, which lied. Global Witness lied and said that Guyana would get 168 billion US dollars. And I think people are beginning to realize now that the report has been withdrawn. The situation is in fact very different. If you look at what is happening across the world, the countries that are now reining in their oil companies are the same countries that have caused the climate change problem. Guyana has not contributed to climate change, and our status as a carbon sink is right now being jeopardized because of the government's obsession with oil at a time when everybody else is rushing to get away from oil. And that has very serious implications for this country. That 9 billion barrels of oil are probably already stranded assets. There is no oil wealth for the country. And even if there was money, there was oil wealth, oil money does not benefit people in country. It benefits a tiny elite. And if you look, we've seen this, just look next door at Venezuela. I don't know why people keep on talking about this vast wealth that we're going to get when oil is really a curse, not oil wealth. So we've got a sort of parallel universe thing going on here with the oil companies and the politicians. I want to come back to this point about the mangroves, though, because once you destroy mangroves, it's very hard to restore them. You can replant them, but the chances of them growing are tiny. So when people smash down mangroves and then turn around and say, well, that's development and we can put them up somewhere else, they're talking utter rubbish. And we ought not to let politicians get away with that. Once you have destroyed something, you can't simply say where you're going to plant it and bringing back. So we're looking at 3 scenarios here. We're looking at economic disaster, because the fossil fuel sector is coming to an end. And our job as citizens is to unite and protect Guyana. As the fossil fuel sector goes down, we have to make sure it does not take this country with it. We're facing financial disaster. We're dealing with 3 small offshore companies that have very little in the way of assets, and Christopher Ram will know this much, much better than I do. And there's a serious risk that Guyana is going to be left with enormous bills, including decommissioning, $46 billion. Well, decommissioning is likely to happen a lot sooner than people have factored in. And then there is the risk of an environmental disaster. We know that Exxon's operations are dangerous and that they're not doing it properly. They have admitted that their standard is that this is below their normal standard. Annette has described Exxon's frightening systemic failures, and I think that captures what's going on very well. Carol Moffat, the president of the Center for International Environmental Law, says there are serious and pressing questions about the safety. We cannot afford to allow an oil company to operate in this way. The LISA permit is coming up for renewal. The permit term was reduced to 5 years. It's going to expire on the 1st of June. They have to apply for a new permit at the end of this year. This is the time for people to mobilize and to say, right, this is what we need in order to protect our country. And the Environmental Protection Act gives us everything we need in order to do that right now. So we have to use what we have rather than saying, oh, we can't do this, we can't do that. Use what we have. And so my message is we have to unite and protect this country from the fossil fuel sector before it takes Guyana down with it. And you cannot rely on the politicians to do this. You cannot rely on the oil companies. You know what they say, you fool me once, shame on you. You fool me twice, shame on me.
Hey, Anna, can I just address one point that Melinda made?
Yes, sure, go ahead.
So Melinda, I was privileged to be part of the massive Guyana mangrove restoration program, which then President Jagdeo had actually spearheaded. And we did successfully replant 11 kilometers of mangroves. And the natural regeneration from that 11 kilometers was over 500 hectares. So we have tangible evidence of replanting being successful, and also replanting going beyond to actually have massive areas regenerated. So it's the science is there, it can be scaled up. And my point about removing, let's say 20 acres of mangroves and having to replant twice or 3 times as much was basically a compromise for the areas that clearly would be easy access in terms of the facilities we need to have Guyanese employed in the sector. And I come back again, Chris and I went to Wales when Wales was shut down. We know the thousands of people who are out there starving, who are not as fortunate as we are, can afford 3 square meals a day. So you have to also look at that aspect, the social aspect as well, in terms of how you actually, take a position. So thank you very much.
We have failed project after failed project when it comes to mangroves. Maybe this one worked, but it is extremely difficult to do it. And secondly, in terms of the social issues in this country, I totally agree with you, but we have more than enough wealth in this country for everybody, and it is being squandered on vanity projects, and it is being wasted by politicians. So that's a different issue. We've had bonanza after bonanza in this country with gold, with diamonds, with bauxite, with timber, with sugar, with rice. This is an extremely rich country, and the resources are squandered and have been squandered for decades by politicians.
All right. On that note, I think I'll wrap up tonight's program. And I'd just like to thank everyone for their contributions. Mr. Ram, Ms. Janki, Miss Annette Arjun Martins. Thank you all for being part of tonight's discussion. We've really put forward some interesting perspectives on the importance of protecting the environment and where Guyana's future is going to be if we don't pay attention to some of the important developments, especially as it relates to making efforts to address a climate change. To our listeners, wherever you are, whether you joined us on Facebook Live or whether you just tuned in on your radio station, thank you very much for participating. We look forward to having you part of the Guyana's Oil and You audience next week. Until next time, thank you again to our panelists, and to everyone else. Do have a wonderful night.
Thank you, Kiana. Stay safe.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Get vaccinated, everybody.
Get vaccinated.
Yes, indeed.